The Soviet Union is often remembered as a place where everything looked gray and uniform, from trousers to automobiles. And there is some truth to that. The planned economy, mass production, and strict construction standards did not leave designers much room to experiment, but that is far from the whole story. During the second half of the 20th century, extraordinary buildings began appearing across the Soviet Union. Monumental concrete structures, flying saucers, towers, palaces, and health resorts. Some of them still look like sets from a science fiction movie. French photographer Frédéric Chaubin first became fascinated with this architecture after seeing a photograph of the Georgian Ministry of Highway Construction in Tbilisi. The design was so bold and unexpected that he decided to search for other unusual buildings from the final decades of the Soviet era. For several years, Chaubin traveled across the former Soviet republics, documenting the experimental architecture of the 1970s and 1980s. The result was a photography book titled Cosmic Communist Constructions Photographed. Its initials spell out a familiar abbreviation, CCCP, the Russian initials for the USSR. The book features 90 remarkable structures. Let's take a closer look at some of the most impressive. Let's begin with the building that started Chaubin's entire journey. It was completed in Tbilisi in 1975. Today, it serves as the headquarters of the Bank of Georgia, but it was originally built for the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic's Ministry of Highway Construction. From a distance, it looks like a collection of enormous concrete beams, stacked on top of one another. The architects wanted the building to occupy as little ground as possible, so they raised its individual sections on supports, leaving much of the land beneath them open. The result is a building that seems to float above the hillside. Some people see a giant robot. Others see a space station or the headquarters of some dystopian government. But this was once an ordinary Soviet ministry, if the word ordinary can be applied to a building like this. The White Tower looks like a control center for interplanetary spacecraft. And that comparison is not as far-fetched as it might seem. The Central Research Institute of Robotics and Technical Cybernetics was built in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, between 1973 and 1986. Its researchers developed robotic systems, contributed to the Soviet space program, and designed machines capable of operating in environments too dangerous for humans. The Institute's main tower rises more than 70 meters into the air. Its widening upper section resembles a giant mechanical flower, or perhaps a spacecraft moments before launch. This is one of those rare cases where a building's futuristic appearance perfectly matched the work taking place inside it. In the Soviet Union, a cinema was not always simply a place to watch films. It could be one of the most important public buildings in an entire city, a genuine palace of popular culture. The Rossiya Cinema opened in Yerevan in 1975. Its two main auditoriums rose above the central section, like a pair of mountain peaks or enormous outstretched wings. The architects combined modern concrete structures with traditional Armenian stone. The results look both ancient and futuristic, part medieval fortress, part spacecraft. For Soviet audiences, going to the cinema was meant to feel like an event. Visitors did not simply arrive to watch a film. They entered a monumental space design to turn an ordinary evening into a special occasion. At first glance, this building could be mistaken for a temple built by an alien civilization. In reality, it was designed for something much more familiar: getting married. The Palace of Rituals opened in Tbilisi in 1984. Its architects deliberately drew inspiration from medieval Georgian churches, stretching and transforming traditional forms into an almost otherworldly composition. In an officially atheist country, Wedding palaces partly assume the ceremonial role once associated with religious buildings. The Soviet state wanted to create its own rituals for the most important moments of a person's life. This was why the building was designed to be much more than a registry office. Its soaring interiors and dramatic exterior were meant to emphasize the importance of the ceremony taking place inside. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the palace was used for a time as a private residence. Wedding ceremonies were eventually held there once again. Another remarkable wedding palace was constructed in the capital of the Kyrgyz Soviet Socialist Republic. Its circular central structure is surrounded by massive concrete forms. From the outside, it resembles a fortress, or perhaps the landing module of a spacecraft. At the same time, the building incorporates motifs inspired by the traditional architecture of Central Asia. This combination was particularly characteristic of the late Soviet period. Modern construction materials, space-age geometry, and national elements associated with a particular republic. Buildings like this challenge the idea that Soviet architecture looked the same everywhere. In fact, architects working far from Moscow were sometimes given more freedom to experiment, and they often made local culture a visible part of their designs. In the center of Kaliningrad stands a building that some consider a symbol of the city, and others consider one of its greatest architectural failures. Construction on the House of Soviets began in 1970, close to the former site of Königsberg Castle, which had been damaged during the Second World War and later demolished. The building was intended to house the regional government, but unstable ground, engineering difficulties, and a shortage of funding caused construction to drag on for years. It was never fully completed or properly opened. The upper part is divided into two massive sections. Because of this, people have compared it to the head of a giant robot or an enormous creature watching over the city. It became an almost perfect dystopian image, a monumental palace of government that stood empty for decades. Soviet ceremonial architecture accompanied people not only at weddings, but also at the end of life. The Kiev crematorium was created during the 1970s. Its farewell halls are formed from several white concrete shells rising from the landscape. The shapes can resemble flower petals, clouds, or flames frozen in motion. There are very few straight lines and almost no conventional walls. The architects wanted to soften the emotional weight of the place and separate the space of mourning from the ordinary world outside. The original design was even more ambitious. A vast artwork known as the Wall of Memory was being created beside the crematorium, featuring large relief compositions. In the early 1980s, however, the Soviet authorities ordered the artwork to be covered with concrete. The history of the crematorium reveals how even during the final decades of the Soviet Union, architectural experimentation could still collide with ideological restrictions. This building became one of the most recognizable examples of Soviet retrofuturism. A circular conference hall sits above the main structure, looking like a flying saucer that has landed on the roof. But its unusual shape was not purely decorative. Elevating the auditorium made it possible to create a large hall without taking up additional space around the building. The Institute collected, organized, and distributed scientific and technical information. In other words, inside this futuristic complex, researchers attempted to organize the growing body of knowledge produced by Soviet science. The building seemed to promise a coming age in which information, technology, and computers would completely transform human life. On a cliff near Yalta stands a structure that could easily be mistaken for an outpost on a distant planet. The Druzhba Sanatorium was completed in 1985 as a joint project for the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia. The construction site presented several serious challenges. It was located on a steep slope in an earthquake-prone area and surrounded by existing buildings. The architects responded by raising the main structure above the ground on 3 enormous supports. Its central section takes the form of a giant ring. Guest room wings extend outward from it, while communal facilities occupy the interior. This solution preserved both the natural landscape and the views of the Black Sea. It also made the sanatorium look like a space station, suspended between the cliffs and the sky. Inside, however, visitors found the familiar features of a Soviet health resort, guest rooms, medical facilities, a dining hall, a swimming pool, and spaces for concerts and other cultural activities. In southwestern Moscow stands a complex unlike anything else in the city. Construction on the new headquarters of the Presidium of the Soviet Academy of Sciences began in 1974 and was completed around 1990. Its most distinctive feature is the elaborate metal structure on the roof. Muscovites nicknamed it the Golden Brains. Some believe it was meant to symbolize human intelligence. Others think it resembles a gigantic antenna, a secret transmitter, or a machine designed to communicate with another planet. In reality, the decorative crown conceals much of the building's technical equipment. The complex was intended to embody the prestige and power of Soviet science, yet it was completed just as the country that had commissioned it was approaching its final days. Today, the Golden Brains can be seen not only as a symbol of knowledge, but also as a monument to the Soviet Union's last great ambitions. The final building on our list stands far beyond the former borders of the Soviet Union. In Havana, Cuba, the Soviet embassy complex was constructed during the final decades of the Cold War. A narrow, strangely shaped tower rises above its massive base. It has been compared to a sword, a fortress, an observation post, and even the handle of a gigantic weapon emerging from the ground. For a diplomatic building, it appears unusually imposing, almost threatening. Rather than openness, its architecture seems to communicate security, technological power, and the permanent presence of the Soviet Union on an island located just off the coast of the United States. The complex retained its diplomatic role after the collapse of the USSR. Today, it houses the Russian embassy. All these buildings are very different. Some were created for scientists and engineers. Others were built for government officials, newlyweds, holiday makers, or cinema audiences. They do not belong to a single architectural style. They combine modernism, brutalism, expressionism, and regional traditions, but they all share a desire to break away from the ordinary. The final decades of the Soviet Union are often described as an age of stagnation. Yet the architecture of this period reveals another side of the country, one that dreamed of space exploration, technological progress, and a radically different future. The future imagined by Soviet architects never arrived, but its concrete monuments are still standing. Which of these buildings surprised you the most? And would you like to see another video about the Soviet Union's strangest architectural creations? Let us know in the comments.